Today we're going to talk about the family status ground, and to do that we're going to look at two movies, The Savages and The Kids Are All Right. So to remind ourselves of that, if we start with The Savages and have a quick look at the clip here.
Set in and around New York City, The Savages tells the story of brother and sister John and Wendy Savage. Wendy is an aspiring playwright and office temp, and John is a professor of drama who is writing a book on Bertolt Brecht. The siblings have been estranged from their abusive father Lenny for more than 20 years, and he now lives with his partner Doris in Arizona. But when Doris passes away unexpectedly and Lenny himself becomes ill, suffering from the early stages of dementia, Wendy and John are left responsible for him. Together they decide that Lenny now needs to be taken care of properly, and despite their previously dysfunctional relationship, they fly to Arizona to bring their father back to New York so they can be closer to him as he sees out his declining days in a nursing home. The Savages is a story about family, responsibility, and what it means to grow up and grow old.
So, what do people think about that? In terms of the family status ground, can anybody remember what the different elements of that were?
You're entitled to equal treatment if you're pregnant, or if you're a carer or a parent of someone who has a disability.
Or you have a child under 18 years of age.
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
And in terms of the movie then, where do you think that might have come in, or what do people get from it?
Well, it applies to a person looking after a parent or guardian who has a disability. It's two siblings, brother and a sister, and they have to look after their elderly father who's suffering with dementia. And it's kind of the trials and tribulations, since the siblings aren't very close as it is. They've grown apart over the years, and they've grown up in kind of an abusive home. Well, it's very much hinted at that's an abusive home. So it's kind of their struggling and suffering with how they should treat their father after how he mistreated them in their youth.
What did you guys think of the movie?
I thought it was, it's particularly pertinent to my life at the moment because my mother is ailing, so I found it a bit harrowing because, you know, particularly in the case of the Savages, they had been really almost estranged, you know, that they were living in two different cities. They didn't communicate very often. They certainly didn't communicate with their father very often. He was living with a person they described as his girlfriend, which I think was gross. But and then she died at the beginning of the film.
Yes.
And then they're called in, and the son says, well, it's okay because he lived in the house here, you know. And then suddenly the son and daughter of the woman say, no, he signed a prenup, and it states that the house does not belong to him and that he can be evicted as soon as she dies. And that's what happens, and that's what causes the consternation. So they're trying to decide, will they bring him to live with one of them or what? And of course it's not practical because the two of them have careers. And of course, as usual, and again from first-hand experience, the boy in the family looks at the girl, the sister, and thinks, well, you don't really have a career like I have. And that's the first bone of contention, you know, because she's a struggling playwright. So you can, I suppose, really say that she could do the struggling near him in, is it Arizona it was in? As opposed to New York. Was the brother in Arizona? Where did the father live?
The father was in Sun City, in Arizona, wasn't
Arizona,
it?
yeah.
And the others two were on the East Coast.
Sorry, yeah. So, I mean, she could probably have moved lock, stock and barrel, but why should she move her life? So, of course, they decided they were going to move him near the brother, actually. So, I suppose, for me, I found it difficult, as I said, but I think the struggle for them to give back what they had not got from their father was the challenge. You know, they say the love you give is the love you got. They didn't seem to get love in their family, and the mother was dead.
What to do.
Yeah, there was a struggle, kind of a moral dilemma really for them, wasn't there? Would they abandon him, put him into a home in Arizona where he'd never have visits, or would they? So they came up trumps, in my opinion, by carting him halfway around
I thought
America.
they were incredibly generous.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think
Completely.
I'd be as generous in a similar situation.
Yeah.
You know, he showed them no love. As you know, it's hinted. They don't quite spell it out, but it's hinted that he was abusive, and yet they take care of him.
They do.
I would have just left him there. I think. Maybe I wouldn't be that mean, but you know.
It's probably different when you're faced with it.
Yes.
You know, you think you'll be different until you're faced with a dilemma like that. And then, you know, this old kind of biological thing comes in and you're thinking, well,
And
he's
it
my
is their
father,
father,
and
of course,
he
yeah.
did give birth to me and he did provide me with some kind of background, and am I going to abandon him now? And I suppose two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah.
You know, if he had been abusive to them, they're not going to be abusive back. I think that's where the goodness in it was for me.
And in particular, Wendy, who was played by Lord Lilly, and Wendy was the daughter. She was very concerned about her father. Like, she said at one point, "Does he have warm clothes? Does he have a jacket? Make sure he's got a coat."
Yeah.
And also, she's trying to make it not like a retirement home.
Yeah.
She puts the red lamp beside his bed, and she tries to make it cozy for him. So in that way, you can see that they love their father, even though in the past they mightn't have got love from him.
Yeah.
But of course, their mother actually abandoned them. So in comparison to her, he was amazing. And I think that's probably the key. That I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand why they were so nice to him. But that's the only parent they had. And you know, he obviously wasn't perfect, but he stayed as opposed to the mother, which you don't quite learn what happened to her.
No,
She don't,
no.
but she's sort of gone.
Yeah.
So.
I suppose going back to what you were saying, Mary, I got that too in terms of that guilt thing that children, adult children have in terms of putting their parent into a home, because when they had just checked him into, I can't remember the name of the home now, but they came out of it and she was saying, "We are horrible people." And that word horrible, she used it about 4 or 5 times. It really struck a chord with me. It brought it home to me, my God, you know, this is something that, you know, many people either are facing now, as you were saying, Mary, or down the line. And then I went on to thinking about when they were talking about which type of nursing home, this versus the Green Hills, the top-notch type of one. And then the brother saying,
They're all the same.
John, yeah. And she's saying, no, this is a more upmarket one. And then John was coming back and saying, well, you know, these beautiful grounds and that are for the guilty relatives of the people in the home, not for the people in the home. I didn't think,
what's really happening.
yes,
They're all going to die.
yeah.
That's what it's about.
The thing that struck me about the film is that it made it easier to deal with it because you can see it's not like this great parent and they're really brokenhearted. It was more like something they had to do. And even it's kind of like she's been more the typical female for me, like the more hysterical, like, "Oh, we're horrible," but she still wasn't saying, "Okay, well, I'll take him home." It's like, "Oh, I feel bad, but yeah, I don't owe him any more than that." And like the brother was saying, and which I think was fair enough, "Don't make me into the bad person here because I'm the one, you know, we both need to get back to our lives. We need this just sorted." And I thought that was a fair enough point and doesn't make you feel as guilty because I was thinking as well, I've seen lots of friends go through it whereby it's very upsetting, but the same thing, they're trying to keep their own lives, whether it's young children or jobs or whatever else, and if they have got a parent that's not well, and now, you know, I mean, that's it, 15, 20 years ago in Ireland, it would be predominantly, whether it was the wife's parents or the husband's parents, whoever was sick would come to their house. And I know lots of people who aren't Irish now would think, well, in our country, and there's articles this week in the newspaper about that saying people feeling guilty that aren't Irish here looking after elderly people and send their own parents back home, but then they're saying they're in a conundrum because if they're not here working looking after someone else's parents, they can't send the money back for care for their parents, so they'd be able to look after them, but they wouldn't have the money for medicine or whatever else, so it's catch-22. But on the other hand, they're saying, why don't the Irish look after their parents? But we've had this, when we just saw other films, that it's the same thing. It says each country goes through a different economic progression that you decide, okay, and it's up to, I suppose, Irish people are letting the government decide, and that even through the boom, you know, lots of builders got a huge amount of subsidies to build very quietly nursing homes everywhere because that's ideally what the government decided would be the cheapest option. They don't want necessarily people to stay at home, and that's why they've been cutting all the home help, any kind of assistance, because they want people to clarify and if they're going to sell homes or whatever and then deal with looking after their parents, or if they keep a parent in their home, which everybody seems, most parents, if they don't, not suffering from dementia or some form, would pick to stay in their own home. Very few, because we don't, like the same in the film where they're talking about, she's thinking, oh, well, I'd like, when she tries to get into the nicer one, and she's saying it's more like a care facility, it's not really like a nursing home, or there's other people who think it's more like an elderly group you hang out and have fun. But even here there's different types, but pretty much in Ireland it isn't big enough, so they have to have people who are in palliative care, people who there's only going to be one way. They're not, you know, very few people, how many people come out of nursing homes unless they're in for convalescence in the short term. So, like, the film, I think that's it. It was very good in that they were very nice how they dealt with the brother and sister, but I think it made easier viewing, because it would have been probably too upsetting if it was them losing a parent. But it certainly brought up a lot of things for me about how, for my own parents and in Ireland in a wider context, we're going to deal with this problem.
Even it's interesting looking at their relationship, and when they find out that their father is unwell and that they have to find a nursing home, there's she breaks down several times crying, but they don't hug until the very last scene in the film. And you think that, you know, someone in that situation, you know, only 2 siblings, you know, they'd be showing that compassion towards each other. She seems to be showing it to everyone else in a way, except her brother. It's almost like she blames her brother as well.
Yeah, I actually saw that because, especially when the father died, you could see they were standing beside each other, but there was no kind of emotional connection or physical connection. And the only time that we saw them getting a physical connection is after he's about to go into a cab to go to Poland. That's the only time they hugged and they expressed some kind of niceties. But during the whole film, it was kind of the brotherly sister rival. There's never this kind of physical and emotional connection with them. And the other thing that I noted as well is that even though their father was a horrible man, you could actually see that he was trying to connect with them, especially with the lamp. When the carer switched off the lamp, he asked him to switch it on, which kind of showing that I think he realized his mistakes and all that, but he can't communicate it with them. He was also an angry person as well. You could say that, but
you got the feeling he wasn't that bad. You know, he wasn't all bad. He wasn't a monster. You know, he did respond to his children's attempts to care for him, I think. Did anyone else think it was very funny?
Yeah,
I actually thought it was a very funny film. I thought there were periods, it was very dark humour, but I actually found myself laughing out loud quite a bit through it. They were so dysfunctional. I think I found it quite entertaining.
But I think she deals with those issues at the end by putting on that play.
Yes.
And even how as closure, and how the brother tears up, and how they do, it is hinted that it's going to be a success. So at least she's exactly. So at least she's found something out of it.
His brother was always tearing, even on eggs, he would just cry.
For a man
He was
who doesn't
emotional,
cry at all. You can't squish it down constantly, and so he starts crying when she makes
There
him
seems to be
eggs.
more of a connection between them at the end.
And what did you think about in the beginning, the difference between the type of caring for his girlfriend in the opening shot of the film in terms of equal treatment, the way the carer, the home help guy, I can't remember his proper title now, but the way he looked after
he was very gentle with the lady. You could see he had a real affection for her. He thought she was a lady. He's putting on her rings, but then he's horrible to the father. But maybe that's because the father wasn't pleasant.
Maybe.
But you're right, there shouldn't be a difference in care just because you like one older person and you don't like the other.
He pointed out though that he wasn't the carer for him.
Yes, he wasn't, actually, you're right.
That he was the carer.
What do you think about the difference in care between, we'll say, that woman, the way she was looked after by the home help guy, gentleman, whatever he was, and then the difference, the way in that compared to the way the Savages looked after their dad? You know,
there was a
they're
real
both
affection
elderly
in
parents.
the carer, I think, whereas the Savages, that tenderness wasn't there at all.
But I suppose the carer was trained as well, and you know, and I mean, you don't go into that kind of job unless you have some kind of caring dimension to your personality. Whereas it's very, very difficult to one day not be worried about this father who's living with his girlfriend over in some other state, and suddenly to have to become the carer and to start, you know, showering him with some kind of sentiment. I'd say it must be really difficult. So I wouldn't blame them for that necessarily. So
I think as well, it actually shows that the carer actually knew that this guy had nobody. So you could just do whatever you want and nobody can come. Exactly. Even in today's context, you find that some families are very protective of their parents, even if they are in care homes, whereas others, they don't actually care.
Sorry, speaking of families and their parents, maybe we might have a look now at The Kids Are All Right.
The Kids Are Alright is the story of Nick and Jules, who are married with 2 children who were born after each of the women was artificially inseminated. Nick and Jules have a long-term successful relationship and a happy family until the children decide to seek out their biological father, Paul. Paul is cool, charming and laid back and wants to become a bigger part of their family's life. Paul's presence begins to expose the fault lines in Nick and Jules' relationship, and when Jules and Paul start an affair, the happy family are thrown into turmoil. Jules begs her family's forgiveness, and by the end of the film we see the adults have begun to reconcile, the family unit is still intact, and the kids are alright.
So, very different movie. What are the thoughts on that one?
I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I'm a big Julianne Moore fan anyway, so and a Joni Mitchell fan, so you can't go. They ticked all my boxes, yeah. No, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I liked how, from a gay perspective, they showed kind of these gay characters who weren't they weren't on the fringes of society. Yeah, like they were very much suburban, and they were pretty well off because of the two businesses, and it just showed gay people in a new light. I thought they weren't these tragic figures or these figures that were pitied or something like that. It was just a normal family unit. Well, you wouldn't say normal, but doing their best to be normal, I'd say. Yeah.
I have to say I loved it as well. It was one of my favourites of the week's films, and for the same reasons that you mentioned, David. There was no kind of sloppiness about it or sentimentality or
Pretense.
yeah, exactly. It was like a normal family insofar as everything was the same. They had the same problems, and of course that's the way it should be, isn't it? Yeah. Whether it's being led by two lesbian women or gay men or whatever, a woman and a man. The kids, the different problems that the two kids had, I thought it was really, really good. And of course the sperm donor enters the scene. All hell breaks loose. The interloper. Yeah.
And what about the kids in that now, compared to the kids we saw in The Savages? In terms of I thought what was interesting there was the 18-year-old trying to assert herself that she was now an adult. That came up a few times.
And her mum just treated her, Nick,
yes.
one of the mums who was played by Annette Bening, just treated her like a kid. She wouldn't let her grow up at all.
Yes.
And she was dying to be treated like an adult and to leave the home, which she did eventually.
I think they listened though. I think as parents they were very open to suggestions that, it's hard to transform yourself from being the caring parent to somebody who's going to let go, You provide roots for your kids, and then what day do you decide when they need the wings today? It's very, very hard to make that decision. So I thought that they responded to what was her name? Joni, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought they responded to her suggestion very, very positively. In that, they said, okay, let's step back from this. Let's see what's going on, and let's see how we can deal with it differently. That's one of the things that I really liked. They were very enlightened, I thought, as a family.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
But it's interesting as well because the director and the screenwriter, Lisa Cholodenko, she's a lesbian herself, and she deals kind of pretty much exclusively with gay films, lesbian films throughout her career. But she had a daughter through artificial insemination, like through a sperm donor. Yeah. So I'd say a lot of it's very autobiographical as well. So at least there is that informed opinion behind the story, rather than just some director plucked out of obscurity his latest box office hit and then put him directing this film. Yeah.
I did feel the feminine touch, I have to say. I really did.
And maybe, Mary, I'm not sure, but maybe one of them certainly for me was the way Jules dealt with the situation when she came back and admitted in front of the family who were all sitting on the couch, I had an affair and whatever, and she just stood, put her hand up and just made herself very vulnerable, just stood there very honest.
She said sometimes you love the people closest to you. Oh no, you hurt the people closest to you the most.
Yes.
Which I thought was.
And in terms of the differences between, if you like, are a typical traditional relationship, or like a male-female, and the two women in this particular relationship, it struck me that the issues were the same. She was saying marriage is hard, it's a long-term thing, you have to work at it. Yeah. So, I just wondered looking at it, how many other situations, if you like, could be saved if people could be that honest, as honest as she was.
I suppose this brings us to the question that people who object to a lesbian family, often come up with, that boys particularly need the male influence. So what do people think of that? Do you agree with?
I would agree that
Would you?
boys and girls, well, I think the ideal is that they have a male and female influence in their lives. I don't think it has to be their parents. I think as long as two people love you, I think you're probably doing better than most if you've got two who love you. But I do think, I think a balance is important, but that could be encouraging more males to become primary school teachers, or, you know, or involving a grandparent more in somebody's life, or having a good friend or a godfather. I don't think it has to be a parent. Now, if it is, great, but then, you know, you might have a parent. The thing that makes me laugh about it is you could have a father, but there's no guarantee that he's going to be any good or a positive influence. He might be a negative influence. You might be better off with two stable, you know, mothers.
Like in the previous film, we discussed, the father was probably not a very good influence to their children. So it's not a guarantee that, I think to me it's just kind of fear of the traditional family unit. If people who are sort of behind that have got a kind of fear that if it becomes a norm, then whatever their normal way of life is going to be destroyed. But I don't think there is anything that you can actually say lesbians or gays are doing, providing negative or bringing negative feedbacks to the kind of normal family unit.
But there is something about that, isn't there, in terms of even in terms of the roles that the two women took. Like, one has almost like, that's something that struck me very forcefully about it. One has, you know, takes, if you like, the more dominant traditional male stand, Nick, and the other takes the more nurturing female stance. What did you think about that? Because that's something that I really looking at it, that bugged me a little bit, I have to say, in terms of, you know, that while they've swapped the sexes, they've kept the roles. You know, which is quite interesting.
With regards to minding of their children, or just in general?
In terms of the movie in general, and also in terms of the minding of the children, and even at the very end, but really where it came home to very forcefully was when Mark Ruffalo, Paul, came to the door, and Nick said, you know, I have my family, if you want a family, you go and get yours. To me, like, that could have been a man standing there, the way she took that position. And what did you guys think about that?
I think it kind of reinforces what we've been saying, that it's just a typical family. The only thing that has been swapped is just now these are just both female instead of male and female. To me, there isn't anything much difference. Obviously, in a family, everybody knows that when I was growing up, my father or my mother was the strong one in the family. Like, my father was, you just typically just sit down and watch, and my mother would do all the discipline. I was afraid of my mother than my father. So that to me doesn't really, I don't know, maybe because I grew up in that kind of situation, I didn't see anything much different. When I saw her, just, oh, she's the strong one in the family. That's what I felt, she's the disciplinarian. That was just what I felt. I didn't see anything, because that's what my mother's role when I was growing up was.
Yeah, I think there's a good cop and a bad cop in any family where there's two parents. It doesn't matter what sex they are. Sometimes it's the dad who's the strict one, and sometimes it's the mother. So maybe it was the same dynamic. It just happened to be two women.
Like, we saw the two females, the way they were rearing the children, but then when Paul came into the scene, in terms of his, if you like, parenting style, or given that he was a very late comer to it and got them at a, you know, past the nappy stage and all that, what did you make in terms of the interactions of, we'll say, the male versus the females towards the two children?
He was a lot more laid back. But then again, he doesn't have the responsibility that the two mothers have. Like, even in his relationship with Laser, he would say his opinion about his friend, while when the mothers were giving that opinion, it was real trying to be politically correct and giving him this informed, you know, and this is why I don't like him, he's not helping you grow, and giving him all these reasons. While the father character is more like, oh yeah, he's a weirdo. Do you know, just flat out and straight. So it was interesting, the parallels between those two, I found.
And also he had the bike, and Nick was totally against motorbikes. Yet he brought Joni on the bike, and she came home really late, and that they were expecting her earlier. So he wasn't very responsible as a father.
I thought that was an interesting piece too, in terms of, back to what you were saying, the letting go piece. For me, when I saw the 18-year-old trying to assert herself, and you could see particularly Nick grappling with that, like realising at what point do you let go? I mean, I don't have children myself, but I imagine if I had, that would be difficult for me in terms of when you've brought them to a certain stage where you're responsible for them, worried about them, and there comes a point then where you actually have to let go, and you could see that in the movie. Certainly for me, it came home a few times. You could kind of see that.
Yeah.
And in terms of the, as a parent of, a child who is over the age of 18, under the age of 18, I mean, they had an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
So in terms of the differences there, did anybody see any differences in parenting style or?
Well, Joni was allowed a lot more responsibility because she had her car as well, while Laser was just always on his bike. Was it a bike or a skateboard? One of them had a bike, one of them had a skateboard, yeah. But that was the main thing that I noticed as far as responsibility goes and as far as how the characters were, yeah.
And then Paul, his character, the way it came in, what did you think of that at the end of the programme? I thought, compared to the way he came in, and they seemed to be all happy families, and then that dinner in Paul's house seemed to be, what brought everything to the fore. And then at the end, I kind of thought at some point he was going to come back in, they were going to make it all kind of happy ever after somehow, but that didn't actually happen.
I thought it was very sad actually when I saw Paul looking in at Laser. Laser was sitting down and he was hoping to connect with Laser, but Laser was having none of it. Laser gets up and walks away. And then the camera follows Paul out, and it's a lonely kind of trip from the house out to his bike, and you can imagine he's going to go home, and he's been kind of tempted with this lovely family scenario, 2 children reared, and it's kind of taken away from him. But it may change afterwards, I don't think that it's the end of the story.
And on that note, I'd just like to thank you all very much for the discussion, very interesting, and we'll see you all another time.